In this video, I'm going to explain how you can create a wet palette. A wet palette is a great way to extend the working life of your water-based acrylic paints. It mostly works well for water-based acrylic paints, works less well for other kinds of paints, but those are the ones you mostly use when painting models. Traditionally, palettes come in either paper form or a ceramic form, which can still be used for some of the more hydrophobic paints like inks and washes or other paints like that. But a wet palette is great because it keeps your paint smooth and avoids any clumping that you might otherwise come across, and keeps the paints lasting longer, so you can have multiple color mixes going for longer periods of time. In order to make a wet palette, you'll need a container, not too deep. This one's nice and shallow, ideally with a lid that will lock down on it so you can keep your paint wet for longer. You will also need some sheets of paper towel. 3 in this case is ideal. You'll need some parchment paper, any that you can get at any grocery or baking store. And you'll need a measuring cup with some water. It doesn't have to be a measuring cup. The quantity of water is not important. Really, what's the most important part is that it has a spout so you can pour it in easily. You'll also need a pair of scissors to do any trimming of the parchment paper or paper towel. And it doesn't hurt to have an extra piece of paper towel just off to the side that you can use to clean up any spills or excess water. In this case, this is one that I've been using to clean my brushes with. First step of creating a wet palette is to take your 3 sheets of paper towel and fold it in half widthwise. Now at this point you want to line it up with your container so that it lays flat on the bottom without curling up along the edges. And for that, we're going to trim it with our scissors. And you could be very precise about this. You can measure it. Oftentimes you'll even have little surfaces like this that'll have gradients that allow you to measure, but you can also just eyeball it. If you eyeball it, be sure to trim less than you think. You can always trim more. And a little more off the side. There we go. That will suffice. We just need this part to soak up the water. Next, we'll be taking our roll of parchment paper, and similar to the paper towel, you can measure this. Remember, measure twice, cut once, or if you're like myself and want to be expedient and off the cuff, you can just eyeball it. Same rules apply. Cut off less than you think you need. We want it to sit in there without rising up on the sides or edges of the container. Okay, just a little more. Okay. Now, we want to place the parchment paper on top of the stack of paper towels, making sure to place the curled side down. Just let it sit there for a second. The measuring cup we've already filled with cold tap water. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. Temperature actually doesn't matter, but cold wool is good. And we're going to pour the water from the measuring cup slowly into the container, starting on the edges and working our way inside. This is a little hard to do with the camera, so you'll be a little more graceful on your setup. What you want is to get the spun or the paper towel wet, and you don't want too much water pooling around the edges. If you pour too much, don't worry. You can always pour the excess out, and in fact, that's what we'll be doing next. We're going to smooth the parchment paper out so that a lot of the air bubbles are removed from underneath, and it's clinging to the paper towel nice and tight. Now we're going to pour out any excess water back into the measuring cup. Again, you don't want it to pool around the edges too high. That actually should be fine. Now we're going to take that extra paper towel that I showed earlier, and we're going to fold it and wipe away any of the excess water on top of the parchment paper. And now our wet palette's ready to be used. The wet palette will keep the paint moister longer so that you can keep your colors smooth, thin. You always want to do thin coats. And you can seal it so that if you have to stop your project halfway through, you can continue from where you left off. And that's how you create a wet palette. Thanks for watching, and good luck in creating yours.